a $2,000 promise that changed the conversation. For millions of Americans, especially seniors living on Social Security, today's discussion begins with a number that immediately caught national attention: $2,000. When early reports surfaced suggesting that former President Donald Trump was exploring a so-called tariff dividend, many people assumed this would be another straightforward relief payment, similar to the stimulus checks sent out during the pandemic. For retirees facing rising food, housing, and medical costs, the idea sounded like much-needed breathing room. But as with many major economic proposals, the headline told only part of the story. Once policy experts began digging into the details, it became clear that this was not a traditional stimulus program funded by government borrowing. Instead, the proposal centers on using revenue collected from tariffs on imported goods and redistributing that money back to American households. On the surface, that sounds simple. Foreign companies pay more to sell products in the U.S., and American families receive a direct financial benefit. However, this is where expectations and reality begin to diverge. What initially looked like a universal payment quickly revealed itself as something far more complex. The word dividend suggests everyone shares equally, but early policy discussions indicate that not everyone may qualify, and that uncertainty is especially troubling for seniors and retirees. For older Americans living on fixed incomes, even the possibility of being excluded raises serious concerns. And that's why understanding how this plan actually works and who it may leave out is more important than ever. What the tariff dividend really means to understand why this proposal is so different from past stimulus programs, we need to clearly explain what a tariff dividend actually is. A tariff is essentially a tax placed on goods imported from other countries. When a foreign company wants to sell products in the United States, it must pay this tax to the U.S. government. The higher the tariff, the more expensive it becomes for foreign goods to enter the American market. Under this plan, the money collected from those tariffs would not simply disappear into the federal budget. Instead, Trump's advisors have suggested redirecting that revenue back to Americans in the form of direct payments. In theory, this turns trade policy into a source of household income. Supporters describe it as a way to make foreign competitors help fund financial relief for American families. But unlike pandemic stimulus checks, this proposal is not based on emergency spending or federal debt. That distinction matters. Because the money comes from tariffs, the amount available depends entirely on how much is collected from imports. That means the payments are not guaranteed, not fixed, and not automatic. For seniors, this raises important questions. If tariff revenue fluctuates from year to year, will payments be consistent? Will they arrive once, annually, or not at all? And more importantly, will retirees who no longer participate in the workforce be considered part of the system that qualifies for these payments? This shift from a universal relief model to a trade-based system is the foundation of the confusion and concern surrounding the $2,000 figure. From universal checks to selective payments. When the idea of a $2,000 tariff dividend first surfaced, the public reaction was immediate. Many Americans assumed this would be a universal payment, meaning everyone would receive the same amount regardless of income, employment status, or age. That assumption was understandable. Previous stimulus programs followed exactly that model, and seniors were automatically included through the Social Security Administration. However, as internal policy discussions evolved, a significant shift began to take place. Economic advisors reportedly started questioning whether it made sense to distribute tariff revenue evenly across the entire population. Their argument was rooted in one core idea. Not all households contribute equally to domestic economic activity tied to trade and manufacturing. Under newer versions of the proposal, payments may be targeted, not universal. Eligibility could depend on factors such as taxable income, consumer spending patterns, or participation in the formal tax system. In practical terms, that means households that buy more American-made goods or file regular tax returns could receive a larger share, while others might receive less or nothing at all. For seniors, this change is critical. Many retirees no longer file tax returns because their income comes primarily from Social Security or disability benefits. Others have limited control over where the goods they purchase are manufactured. If eligibility is tied to tax filings or purchasing behavior, millions of older Americans could fall outside the qualifying group. This transition from a simple promise to a selective system is why experts now describe the tariff dividend as a policy with a twist. What began as a broad financial pledge may end up benefiting only specific segments of the population. Why seniors are asking the hardest questions. As the tariff dividend proposal shifts from a universal concept to a selective one, no group is asking more urgent questions than seniors and retirees. For older Americans, financial planning is not about opportunity or growth, it is about stability, predictability, and survival. Most retirees live on fixed incomes relying on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits to cover essential expenses. The central concern is simple but serious. Will seniors qualify at all? If eligibility depends on tax filings, income thresholds, or consumer spending habits, many retirees could be excluded by default. A large number of seniors no longer file federal tax returns because their income falls below the taxable threshold. Others rely entirely on benefits that are not tied to active employment or purchasing behavior. Another issue is control. Seniors do not always have the flexibility to choose where products are made. Prescription medications, medical equipment, utilities, and basic household goods are often imported, regardless of personal preference. If the tariff dividend rewards those who buy American-made products, older adults may find themselves disadvantaged through no fault of their own. Advocacy groups for seniors and people with disabilities have already raised alarms. They argue that the Americans most affected by inflation, yes, retirees and those on fixed incomes, are the very people who need relief the most. Excluding them from a major economic program would deepen financial insecurity at a time when costs for food, housing, and healthcare remain high. For seniors, this proposal is no longer about extra money. It is about fairness, inclusion, and whether long-term contributors to the U.S. economy will be recognized or overlooked. Who would actually send the money? One of the most overlooked but critical questions surrounding the tariff dividend proposal is how the money would actually be delivered. In previous stimulus programs, the process was relatively clear. The Internal Revenue Service handled payments based on tax returns, while the Social Security Administration worked with the U.S. Treasury to ensure seniors and disability recipients were included automatically. This time, the situation may be very different. Because the tariff dividend would be funded by trade revenue rather than direct federal spending, there is no established system already in place. Policy analysts suggest the payments could be routed through the Treasury Department, potentially using rebate-style programs instead of traditional stimulus checks. For seniors, this uncertainty is troubling. If the IRS is the primary agency in charge, retirees who do not file tax returns may be left out unless special accommodations are made. If the Social Security Administration is not formally involved, automatic payments to Social Security, SSI, and SSDI recipients cannot be assumed. Another complication is timing. Tariffs must first be collected from importers, then processed, then allocated for distribution. That process could take months or even longer. During that time, seniors would continue facing rising costs without any immediate relief. The lack of clarity around administration increases the risk of delays, confusion, and exclusion, problems many seniors remember all too well from earlier stimulus rollouts. Without a clear delivery mechanism, the promise of a $2,000 payment remains uncertain, especially for those who depend on consistent, reliable income. The inflation trade-off seniors cannot ignore. Supporters of the tariff dividend often frame it as a patriotic economic strategy, but critics warn that there is a serious trade-off seniors cannot afford to overlook. Tariffs, by design, raise the cost of imported goods. When companies pay more to bring products into the United States, those costs are frequently passed down to consumers. For older Americans living on fixed incomes, this is a major concern. Everyday necessities, such as groceries, clothing, household items, electronics, and even medical supplies often rely on global supply chains. If tariffs increase prices across these categories, seniors could feel the impact immediately at the checkout counter. This creates a troubling scenario. A retiree might eventually receive a one-time payment, possibly up to $2,000, but could spend more each month on basic living expenses in the meantime. Over the course of a year, higher prices could easily erase the value of that payment. Economists are divided on whether the long-term benefits outweigh the short-term pain. Supporters argue that higher prices are temporary and that increased domestic manufacturing will eventually stabilize costs. Critics counter that seniors do not have the luxury of waiting years for economic theory to play out. For retirees on Social Security, inflation is not an abstract concept. It is the difference between filling a prescription, paying a utility bill, or skipping necessities. That is why many experts caution that any plan involving tariffs must include strong protections for older Americans. Otherwise, the financial burden could arrive long before any relief does. timing delays, and the pressure on fixed incomes. Even if the tariff dividend proposal moves forward, one of the biggest challenges seniors may face is timing. Unlike traditional stimulus programs that were funded immediately through federal spending, this plan depends on a multi-step process. Tariffs must first be imposed, then collected from importers, processed through the federal system, and only afterward distributed to households. That process could take many months, possibly even a year or longer. During that waiting period, Americans would likely begin paying higher prices on imported goods almost immediately. For seniors living on Social Security or disability benefits, this creates a dangerous gap between rising expenses and delayed relief. Fixed incomes do not adjust quickly. Social Security payments arrive on a set schedule, and cost of living adjustments are calculated annually, not in real time. If tariffs drive prices up before any dividend is paid, retirees may be forced to dip into savings, reduce essentials, or delay medical care just to make ends meet. This delay also adds emotional stress. Many older Americans plan their budgets carefully, down to the dollar. The uncertainty of if or when money might arrive makes it nearly impossible to plan responsibly. For seniors who remember past stimulus delays, the fear is not hypothetical. It is based on experience. Timing, in this case, may matter just as much as the amount. A payment that arrives too late may offer far less relief than promised, especially for those who need help the most. The political message behind the money, beyond the economics, the tariff dividend proposal carries a powerful political message, especially as the country looks ahead to upcoming election cycles. For many voters, the idea of receiving direct payments funded by foreign companies rather than government debt is emotionally appealing. It taps into long-standing frustrations about globalization, outsourcing, and the feeling that American workers have been left behind. Seniors, in particular, represent one of the most reliable voting blocs in the United States. They vote in higher numbers, pay close attention to economic policy, and care deeply about programs like Social Security, Medicare, and cost of living protections. That makes them central to this conversation, whether the policy explicitly names them or not. Supporters of the tariff dividend frame it as a symbol of economic independence. The message is simple. America should benefit directly from its own trade power, and citizens should feel those benefits in their wallets. For retirees struggling with rising expenses, that promise resonates on a personal level. At the same time, critics argue that political messaging is moving faster than policy details. Announcing a $2,000 figure generates headlines and hope, but without clear guarantees for seniors, it risks becoming another source of disappointment. Older Americans have seen bold promises before, only to encounter fine print later. This tension between political appeal and practical impact is why the tariff dividend has become such a charged topic. For seniors, the stakes are not ideological. They are financial, immediate, and deeply personal. Lessons seniors remember from past stimulus programs. For many seniors, the debate over a possible $2,000 tariff dividend brings back vivid memories of earlier stimulus programs. During the pandemic, millions of Americans waited anxiously for relief checks only to encounter delays, confusion, and eligibility problems. While many retirees did receive payments automatically through Social Security, others experienced long waits or had to file additional paperwork. Those experiences left a lasting impression. Seniors learned firsthand that even well-intentioned programs can struggle during rollout. Errors in tax records, outdated addresses, or missing information caused frustration and financial stress, especially for those who depended on timely support to cover essentials. The concern now is that a tariff-based payment system could be even more complicated. Unlike previous stimulus checks, which relied on existing infrastructure, this proposal may require an entirely new administrative process. That increases the risk of technical issues, processing delays, and unintended exclusions. For older Americans, the fear is not just inconvenience, it is vulnerability. A missed payment or delayed check can mean postponed medical care, unpaid utility bills, or added debt. Many seniors simply cannot afford another period of uncertainty. These lessons from the past explain why retirees are cautious. They are not dismissing the idea of a dividend, but they want clear rules, simple delivery, and automatic inclusion. Without those safeguards, the promise of financial relief may feel uncomfortably familiar, hopeful at first, uncertain in practice. Income-based payments and the risk of exclusion. One of the most discussed revisions to the tariff dividend proposal is the idea of income-based payments. Under this model, the full $2,000 amount would not necessarily go to everyone. Instead, eligibility and payment size could be adjusted based on income levels, filing status, or other financial indicators. Supporters argue that this approach makes the system more fair. Lower income households would receive the full benefit, while higher income earners might receive a reduced amount or nothing at all. On paper, this sounds reasonable. But for seniors, the reality is more complicated. Many retirees technically fall into lower income categories, yet their financial situation is fragile. A senior living on Social Security may have limited taxable income but still face high medical expenses, housing costs, and out-of-pocket care. If the system relies heavily on tax data alone, it may fail to capture these real-world pressures. There is also the risk that income-based rules create additional paperwork. Seniors may be required to verify eligibility, submit forms, or respond to notices, barriers that disproportionately affect older adults, especially those with limited internet access or health challenges. What worries experts most is that every new condition increases the chance of error. The more complex the formula, the greater the likelihood that vulnerable seniors could receive less than expected or nothing at all. For retirees, simplicity is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Experts warn of growing inequality. As details of the tariff dividend proposal continue to evolve, economists and policy analysts are increasingly divided. While some praise the idea as innovative, others warn that poorly designed distribution rules could deepen inequality rather than reduce it. This concern is especially relevant for seniors and retirees who already face financial vulnerability. Experts point out that tying payments to tax filings, income data, or consumer behavior tends to favor individuals who are already more financially active. Those with steady employment, higher spending power, or access to financial systems are more likely to qualify smoothly. Meanwhile, seniors living on fixed incomes often operate outside these systems, not by choice, but by circumstance. Another issue raised by analysts is the cumulative effect of exclusions. A senior might miss out not because of one factor, but because of several small ones: no tax filing, limited online access, or incomplete records. Each condition adds friction, and friction disproportionately affects older Americans. Advocacy groups argue that seniors paid into the system for decades and should not be treated as peripheral participants. If a national economic dividend is created, they believe retirees deserve automatic inclusion, just as they were during prior stimulus efforts. Without clear protections, critics warn that the tariff dividend could become a program that rewards economic participation today while overlooking lifetime contribution. For seniors, that distinction is not theoretical. It defines whether relief reaches those who need it most. Long-term economic effects beyond the check. While much of the public attention has focused on the $2,000 figure, some economists urge Americans, especially seniors, to look beyond the immediate payment. They argue that the true impact of the tariff dividend may lie in its long-term economic effects, particularly if it succeeds in reshaping U.S. manufacturing and employment. Supporters believe higher tariffs could encourage companies to move production back to American soil. More domestic factories could mean more jobs, stronger local economies, and increased stability in supply chains. For seniors, this may not translate into direct income, but it could benefit their children, grandchildren, and communities. A stronger domestic economy can reduce reliance on global disruptions, which have driven price spikes in recent years. In theory, that stability could help control inflation over time, easing pressure on fixed incomes. Some analysts see this as an indirect but meaningful benefit for retirees. However, critics caution that these outcomes are uncertain and take years to materialize. Seniors living on Social Security need relief now, not promises of future economic shifts. Long-term benefits do little to help with today's grocery bills or medical costs. For older Americans, the value of this plan depends not just on economic theory, but on whether its long-term goals align with immediate needs. Without direct inclusion, even a successful industrial strategy may feel distant and disconnected from daily reality. The unanswered questions seniors care about most, despite weeks of discussion and speculation, one reality remains clear. Many of the most important questions about the tariff dividend are still unanswered. For seniors, uncertainty is often more stressful than bad news. Not knowing whether help is coming or waiting or whether they qualify makes planning nearly impossible. One major unknown is frequency. Will the payment be a one-time check, an annual dividend, or something recurring? Seniors rely on predictable income. A single payment may offer short-term relief, but it does little to address ongoing cost of living pressures. Another unanswered question is eligibility enforcement. Will seniors be automatically included, or will they need to apply? If applications are required, what documentation will be necessary? History shows that complex forms and digital systems can create barriers for older adults, particularly those with health limitations or limited internet access. There is also confusion around timing. Even supporters of the plan admit there is no clear timeline. Months of delay could pass while prices rise and household budgets tighten. For retirees, that gap could have real consequences. These unanswered questions explain why many seniors remain cautious. Hope without clarity can quickly turn into anxiety. Until firm rules are established, the tariff dividend remains a promise surrounded by uncertainty. And uncertainty is something fixed incomes cannot absorb easily. What must be done to protect seniors? As debate around the tariff dividend continues, many experts agree on one point. If this plan moves forward, protections for seniors must be built in from the start. Without clear safeguards, retirees living on fixed incomes could be unintentionally harmed by a policy meant to provide relief. One widely supported recommendation is automatic inclusion. Analysts argue that anyone receiving Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits should be included by default, just as they were during previous stimulus programs. Automatic payments reduce confusion, eliminate paperwork, and ensure vulnerable populations are not left behind. Another critical safeguard is transparency. Seniors need clear, simple explanations, not fine print. Eligibility rules, payment amounts, and timelines should be communicated in plain language through trusted channels, including the Social Security Administration. Confusion breeds fear, and fear undermines trust. Experts also stress the importance of timing coordination. If tariffs are introduced gradually, payments should follow quickly to offset rising costs. Delays disproportionately harm retirees who have little flexibility in their budgets. Finally, policymakers are urged to consider income reality, not just tax data. Medical costs, housing expenses, and caregiving responsibilities must be factored in. A fair system recognizes lifetime contribution, not just current economic activity. For seniors, protection is not optional, it is essential. Without it, even well-intentioned policies can do lasting damage. What seniors should do. Next. As we bring this discussion to a close, it's important to step back and look at what the tariff dividend proposal truly represents. The idea of a $2,000 payment captured attention because it spoke directly to financial pressure that millions of Americans feel every day, especially seniors living on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits. But as we've seen, the reality behind that headline is far more complex. Right now, nothing about this plan is final. Eligibility rules are still being debated, distribution systems are not yet defined, timelines remain uncertain. For seniors, that means one thing above all else: do not make financial decisions based on assumptions or early headlines. Hope is understandable, but planning must be grounded in confirmed information. There are, however, practical steps older Americans can take. First, stay informed through reliable sources, especially official updates from the Social Security Administration and Treasury Department. Second, make sure your Social Security and tax records are current, even if you do not normally file taxes. Accurate information reduces the risk of exclusion if payments are approved. Third, continue budgeting conservatively. A potential one-time payment should never replace careful planning for monthly expenses. Most importantly, remember this: economic proposals come and go, but your financial security depends on preparation, awareness, and advocacy. Seniors have earned a voice in this conversation after decades of contribution to the American economy. Whether or not this particular dividend reaches everyone, staying informed ensures you are ready for whatever comes next. As new details emerge, clarity will improve. Until then, knowledge remains your strongest protection. Stay alert, stay prepared, and never underestimate the value of understanding how policy decisions affect your daily life.